The package arrived without a sender. Inside, half of an ancient map, a strange brass compass, and one handwritten warning. Never finish the map.
Ethan unfolded the map. It showed an island. But something felt wrong. The compass wasn't pointing north. It pointed toward the map itself.
Ethan flipped the map over. A faded symbol was burned into the parchment. It matched the engraving on the brass compass. Suddenly, the compass needle spun wildly, then stopped. The compass pointed toward the Atlantic Ocean. Ethan searched old navigation records. Then he found it. A forgotten island, erased from every modern map. Its name? Black Hollow. 3 days later, Ethan arrived at Gray Harbor. Every captain refused the journey. They all whispered the same words. Black Hollow never lets anyone return. Just as Ethan turned away, an old voice called out, "You're carrying the black map." Ethan stopped. An old sailor stepped from the fog. "I've been waiting for you."
Captain Elias stared at the compass. His face turned pale. That compass shouldn't exist anymore. He looked at Ethan. The last man who carried it never came back. And if you're holding it now, the island has already chosen you. Before sunrise, their boat left Gray's Harbor. The sea was strangely calm. No wind, no birds, no other ships. Captain Elias whispered, "Once we cross this line, the world won't be able to find us." 3 hours passed without a single wave. Then, the compass began spinning faster and faster. Captain Elias whispered, "We're crossing the forgotten line." Out of the fog, a massive lighthouse appeared. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't abandoned. Its light was already turning. Slowly toward Ethan's boat. The boat drifted toward the lighthouse. But something was wrong. There were no waves, no wind. Yet the boat kept moving on its own. Captain Elias whispered, "It's pulling us." Beneath the lighthouse, they found a stone pier. No footprints, no boats. Only one ancient message carved into the rock. "Leave now, or become part of the island." Ethan stepped onto the island. The silence was overwhelming. No birds, no insects, no waves. Only the sound of his own footsteps. Then, the compass stopped working.
Just beyond the trees, Ethan found footprints. Fresh footprints. Someone had walked here recently. But the tracks suddenly ended, as if the person had simply vanished. The footprints returned. They led to ancient stone ruins, hidden beneath giant trees. At the center stood a weathered statue. Its stone hand pointed deep into the jungle. Ethan examined the statue. Something caught his eye. A small circular slot hidden in the stone. He pulled out the brass compass. It fit perfectly. The moment the compass locked into place, the statue trembled. Ancient gears echoed beneath the ground. Stone cracked. Dust filled the air. Slowly, the jungle floor split open. A hidden staircase descended into complete darkness. Ethan aimed his flashlight below. The staircase seemed endless. Then, he noticed something. Fresh boot prints, covered in wet mud. Someone had gone down only hours earlier. Ethan descended carefully. Every step echoed through the ancient tunnel. The air grew colder. Then, his flashlight caught something. An abandoned backpack. Still covered in fresh mud. Ethan opened the backpack. Inside, food, water, a working radio. Then he found a torn journal page. It read, "Don't trust the Guardian." The tunnel suddenly ended. A gigantic underground chamber opened before them. Ancient stone pillars reached into darkness. In the center, a massive circular mechanism had been waiting for centuries. Ethan stepped closer. Around the mechanism, 12 stone discs began to rotate. Then, every disc stopped on a different symbol. Captain Elias whispered, "Choose wrong, and the island keeps you forever." Ethan studied the symbols. One pattern, repeated 3 times. The compass vibrated as it pointed to a single stone disc. Ethan took a deep breath and pressed it. The chamber fell completely silent. A deep rumble shook the chamber. The stone floor split apart. Not a trap, a doorway. Hidden beneath the mechanism was an ancient passage that no explorer had ever recorded. Ethan led the way into the hidden passage. The walls looked untouched for centuries. Then, his flashlight stopped. A burning torch. Someone had been here only moments ago. A shadow crossed the tunnel.
Ethan turned instantly. Nothing. Then he looked down. Fresh footprints. Beside them, a single black feather. Ethan picked up the feather. It was warm, as if it had just fallen. Then, a distant bell echoed. Once. Captain Elias froze. Run. He's coming. Heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Slow, deliberate. Getting closer. Ethan raised his flashlight. A tall figure stood at the end of the corridor, wearing an ancient black mask. Ethan shouted, "Who are you?" The figure never answered. Instead, he slowly raised one hand, then pointed behind Ethan. Ethan turned. His blood ran cold. The tunnel had disappeared. Captain Elias was gone. Only silence remained. And the Guardian had vanished too. Ethan stepped forward. Alone. The hidden passage grew darker. Then, his flashlight revealed hundreds of old lanterns. Every one suddenly lit itself. At the end of the corridor, a giant stone door waited, covered in strange carvings. Then, Ethan noticed a fresh handprint. Someone had opened it today. Ethan placed his hand on the ancient door. It didn't move. Then, the brass compass began glowing again. A soft click echoed. Slowly, the stone door started opening. Beyond the doorway wasn't treasure. It was an underground city. Empty streets, silent towers, frozen in time. Then, one window lit up. Ethan stepped inside. Every building was perfectly preserved. Not a single leaf moved. Then, he heard it. Footsteps. Somewhere above him. Ethan aimed his flashlight toward the rooftop. Nothing. Then, a door slammed shut. High above. Someone was watching him and hiding. Ethan followed the sound upstairs. The staircase was covered in dust, except one trail. Fresh footprints led upward. Someone was still here. Ethan reached the highest floor. The room was completely empty, except one wooden table. On it lay an old photograph. Ethan froze. Ethan picked up the photograph. His hands began to shake. It showed Captain Elias standing here 50 years ago, wearing the exact same clothes. Suddenly, the radio came alive. Static filled the room. Then, a voice whispered, "Ethan, don't trust Captain Elias." Ethan grabbed the radio. "Who's there?" Only Static answered. Then the voice returned. "Leave now, before Elias finds you."
A floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan spun around. Captain Elias stood in the doorway, silent, motionless, smiling for the first time.
"Where were you?" Ethan asked. Captain Elias didn't answer. He slowly pointed at the photograph, then whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." Before Ethan could speak again, the photograph changed. Captain Elias slowly disappeared from the picture, leaving only one person, Ethan. Ethan looked up. The room was empty. Captain Elias had vanished again. Then the radio whispered, "You're finally starting to remember." The tower suddenly trembled. Ancient stones began collapsing. Ethan ran toward the stairs. Then he heard Captain Elias scream. Ethan rushed downstairs. "Captain!" His voice echoed through the tower. No answer. Only the sound of rocks falling. Then he saw the cane. Ethan picked up the cane. Beneath it was a hidden map. One sentence was circled. "The Guardian is not your enemy." Anthony unfolded the ancient map. It wasn't a treasure map. It was an escape route. One path was marked in red, straight to the Guardian. Suddenly, every lantern went out. Complete darkness. Ethan stopped breathing. Then, two glowing eyes opened right behind him. Ethan turned instantly. The Guardian was gone. But on the wall, 3 fresh scratches had appeared, like a warning left just for him. Traced the scratches. A hidden mechanism clicked. Part of the wall slid away. Behind it was a small room, waiting to be opened. Ethan stepped into the hidden room. It was surprisingly untouched. On a stone pedestal rested a leather journal. The cover read, Expedition 1976. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Ethan opened The journal. The first page held one photograph. 5 explorers smiled at the camera. Ethan counted again. There were only 4. The 5th face had vanished. The next page made Ethan freeze. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed and dated tomorrow. The final line read, Ethan Blake never escaped. Suddenly, every page began turning by itself, faster and faster. Then they stopped on one page. It showed Ethan's own portrait. Ethan slowly closed the journal. The room became silent. Then, a child's voice whispered, "You're too late. It already knows your name." Ethan turned toward the voice. A little girl stood there, barefoot, wearing an old white dress. Then she smiled and disappeared. Ethan ran after the girl. She never looked back. Every corner led deeper into the city. Then she stopped in front of a sealed stone gate. The little girl raised her hand. The ancient gate slowly opened. Brilliant light flooded the chamber. Ethan covered his eyes. Then, everything went white. When the light faded, Ethan opened his eyes. The underground city was gone. He stood on the island's cliffs, alone, as if nothing had happened. Ethan checked his camera. Every photo was erased, except one final image. In the background, Captain Elias was quietly watching him. Ethan looked toward the cliff. Captain Elias was gone. Only fresh footprints led to the edge. Then they simply ended. Ethan opened his satchel. Inside, the brass compass was spinning again. It wasn't pointing north. It pointed back to the island. Ethan looked one last time. The fog slowly parted. Far offshore, another island appeared. On its highest cliff stood the Guardian, waiting. Ethan never told anyone what happened on Black Hollow Island. But every year, on the same morning, one anonymous package arrives at his door. Inside
is one new photograph.